And we reached the last presenters of this session and also for the second day of the conference. Laura Rodewald and Marie-Corinne Onstwedder from the European Central Bank will speak about the information governance at the European Central Bank. A case study about moving to automation of the processes. So ladies, the floor is yours now.
Thank you very much. First of all, we realize that we are really the last thing which is keeping you from your well-deserved beer or glass of wine. So we would like to thank you very much for still being here for this, for our presentation. My name is Marie-Corinne Onstwedder. This is my colleague Laura Rodewald. And we are here to present the topic how information governance is implemented at the ECB. And we would like to demonstrate via 3 projects, to go a bit more in detail, that this is more and more done via the use of automations. But first, for those who are not familiar with the European Central Bank, we would like to briefly explain the context and also why information governance is quite essential for the ECB. We are located in Frankfurt. We are an EU institution, and the main mission of the European Central Bank is to maintain the price stability, so the stability of the euro. The organization is also responsible for the monetary policy and for a smooth functioning of payment systems. In 2014, the mandate of the organization was expanded by also taking up the role of supervising banks. And with this quite important mandate and scope, the organization is at the heart of the euro system and plays quite an essential role within Europe, but also beyond. We are a knowledge organization, and you might imagine that information by executing our tasks and activities is essential. We are can be held accountable, we have to be transparent what we are doing, and therefore information is key and has to be accurate, available and auditable. The importance of information governance is also reflected by the fact that we have a division called Information Governance Division at the bank, and it consists of 4 teams, and from different perspectives we try to make sure that information is governed in a correct manner. We have an information policy and records management team, designing the policies and also providing centralized record management support. There's a solutions team which is continuously developing the system which we use within the organization. We have an archive for paper-based archiving, but also for digital preservation. And we have a library, and our colleagues from the library are working to make external information sources available for those who need to work with it. Looking a bit more closely to how we govern information at the ECB, it's quite essential to inform you that we have an information governance framework, and this explains the context how we work. It defines the principles, the guiding principles to use in the creation and the storage and the maintenance of our information. But maybe most important for now is also to explain that it's based on 4 pillars. It's one, we focus on policies, we focus on our people, we focus on process and also on technology. And maybe as it says, like the system is as good as its component parts. In case one element changes in one of the pillars, it has an effect on the others. So we continuously have to monitor if all pillars are still in sync. And we have an EIM strategy, an information enterprise management strategy, which is more the practical translation of where we want to go with information governance at the ECB. And it consists of more long-term, medium and long-term activities. Looking to the 4 pillars a bit more closely, to start with then the policies and the people. For the policies, we have defined and created for all the stages of the life cycle guidelines and policies which our staff have to adhere to. So for the creation, we have, for example, people are asked to use official ECB templates. They have to store this with particular metadata in our system. For the capture and the storage, we also have guidelines that we have to capture ECB relevant information always in our main system. For distribution, there's a confidentiality regime explaining how to classify our content. We have quite an extensive and advanced access model to make sure that also the information is shared with those who need to know it and also not shared with those who do not need to know the information. Preservation and deletion is all done in line with our filing and retention plan, but Laura will go a bit more in detail on this topic. When we look at policy, at people, it's quite important to mention that we have responsibilities set for different roles regarding information management, and we have 3 important roles. One staff member has certain responsibilities. We have our key users, and also managers are also assigned certain responsibilities when it comes to managing information. And our division where we both work in, Information Governance Division, is the division which guides the people and also which develops the guidelines, but also monitors their implementation. And last, we provide quite some attention and time to training of people. So it's not only that we have the guidelines and the policy and we monitor, we also make sure that everybody knows how to work with what we have designed. All newcomers, for example, are trained. Our key users get specific training. And you can also have one-to-one sessions in case you require more training. And then when we look at the other 2 pillars, technology and processes, we have a system which we call Darwin, and it's the designated system where you have to store electronic ECB information. It's a system based on open text. It's in use since 2007, and it's quite an essential, well, really the most essential system to execute our task. It's used by the ECB, but also by our stakeholders. Also will be explained by Laura in a bit more detail. Besides our main system, Darwin, of course, we also have operational databases. We have personal HR-related data, which is stored in our HR system. And we have, of course, also still network drives. And also Laura will explain how we use network drives at the ECB at this moment. Paper-based documents, we do not have so much, but the ones which are really essential, for example, contracts, are still stored in our archive. And we are still very much afraid for the red double-decker bus, which was just mentioned by an example. We make very clear splits between ECB-related information and personal information. So we really have the rule that ECB-related information should be stored in our system, Darwin, and that personal information can also be used and stored, but then only temporary, short-lived in our Outlook system. And all things which are more longer periods of time have to be stored in our Darwin system. And also this will be explained by Laura.
Thank you very much. As Marie-Corinne said, we very much appreciate your time and try to keep it as brief as possible so we don't stand between you and that glass of wine or whatever it is you like to relax with. Okay, so Marie-Corinne has explained what we do, how we do it, different policies and procedures, etc. in place. So we like to think we have a rather robust framework. But of course, no surprise, we also face many challenges. And I would say one of our largest challenges at the moment is simply the explosion of information and users that we have. Why do we have such an explosion of users? Well, Marie-Corinne already kind of explained that. In 2014, our organisation almost doubled, I won't say overnight, but over the period of a year, because we took on new responsibility of banking supervision. But anyway, and generally, users change and so on and so forth. I think also, like any of your organisations, you're probably all seeing that. I know it was very well explained on a previous slide, that simply we're in an age where information is just being created and growing at an exponential level. Just to illustrate a little bit in some of the numbers here at the ECB, just to give you an idea of the size of what we're dealing with. So we are actually only about 2,500 full-time staff members, but actually we have about 22,000 users of our EDRMS system, or this Darwin system that Marie-Corinne has talked about. And you're saying, oh, why is that? Well, on any given day, we actually roughly have about 5,000 people working at the ECB. That's permanent staff, but also temporary workers, contractors, etc., etc. And actually our largest user base is actually outside the ECB. We are kind of the center of the Eurosystem, or the hub and spoke system. And we have about 16,000 users in the various national central banks and national supervisors. We already have about 12 million documents in our EDRMS system. On top of that, we don't use our EDRMS or Darwin just as a pure document and records management system. It's also used to support a lot of collaboration. So we have workflows in there, we have wikis, we have blogs, etc. Just to give you a flavour, on any given day, we have roughly about 6,000 people accessing our system, roughly half and half, half inside the ECB, half outside. Okay. So, with all of that explosion of information and users, how do we ensure that we correctly govern, etc., that information? And increasingly, we've been noticing that we need to move away from hands-on focus on day-to-day management of information, simply because it's not possible with the growing number of users and the growing amount of information, and the number of staff, in a way, in the information governance area is staying the same. So 3 different case studies to explain a little bit about how we're trying to automate things to kind of what would I say, balance those 2 objectives. One project is already complete. It's the closure of our network drives. One is very much well underway, which is the automation of retention in our EDRMS, or our Darwin system. And the third is very much in its infancy, just a work in progress in terms of retention of emails within the system. Okay, the first one that I want to talk to you about was the closure of our network drives. So we brought in our Darwin system, or our EDRMS, in 2007. So we've had it for about 10 years or so. People after that date were no longer supposed to create any documents in our EDRMS. You may be shocked to hear that not everybody followed our instructions to the letter of the law, and a couple of people, we had like widespread, and it very much depended on the different business areas. So some people continued to use the network drives as their de facto EDRMS system. Not that it is an EDRMS, but their system of use, etc. And of course, there were inherent weaknesses with that. One, we had a huge proliferation of network drives based on outdated technology. So we had about 30 different network drives. So we had a sheer volume of different network drives, but we also had inherent problems with each of those. Reduced security, very difficult to see what the access rights were, how to audit trails, etc. And quite a lot of the information we create is quite sensitive, and of course therefore explains that there's issues with that. Also, there's no easy way to implement retention on network drives, and simply, of course, we are an EU institution. We do have to adhere to public access requests, or freedom of information, the same if in case you're from the UK. Is a term more familiar with you. And of course, searching one system is far less time consuming than searching 30, I think. All of us are comfortable enough probably with that maths. Okay. So what did we do then? So we took a look at our network drives, which were at that stage the K drive, or these 30 different network drives, and we had one updated system, which was a P drive. And what we asked our different business areas to do was to identify what documents are still in those systems that actually need to be kept, and then migrate them to this new EDRMS, or actually at that stage it wasn't particularly new, but we won't talk about that. And also identify what program files, complex databases, etc., are you still using, do you still need to use, that aren't suitable for storage in our EDRMS or in the open text software, and we migrate them to this new improved P drive system. And then we were quite ruthless. We just said, okay, everything else will be deleted. And how we did that and how we got buy-in, I guess, was we broke it into 3 different phases. The very first phase was to look at the databases in a way to identify what databases are needed and move them to the new system, and to, in a way, clear them out of the way so that the backlog of documents that needed to be looked at could then be looked at in phase 2. And then as part of phase 3, we did a freeze system. So basically, people were very nervous about us deleting their information, even though sometimes we could show it hadn't been used or opened in 10 years. So we decided to freeze it for a year. And then actually we also, freeze it for about 6 months, and then we also removed access rights. So people didn't have access to it for an additional 6 months, but it was there in the background. And only at that stage did we actually get the full buy-in then to delete it, and that has now happened, so that's been a success for us. Okay, so that was case study 1. Case study 2 is perhaps maybe a little bit more complex, and I don't know how many of you are working to implement automated retention, but this has been quite a labour of love and of hardship, I would say, for ourselves. So at the European Central Bank, we have what's called our filing and retention plan. I'm sure many of you have it. I'm going to use this pointer simply I always wanted to use one. It's my first opportunity to do so. So we, of course, set out the different types of information that the ECB creates. That's our series. We then set out how long that information needs to be kept for. And then on top of that, to help automate it in the system, we then designated which of those series, I would say the definitive copy of it. So is that in digital or paper? Of course, if it's in paper, it's not so relevant to the automated retention in Darwin, but the vast, vast majority of our information is in digital format. And then we started to define retention trigger points, and I'll explain a little bit more about that in a moment. I think it's probably quite obvious why we were trying to automate this in the system. Reduces manual effort, also helps us identify what we need to keep and what we can get rid of. And by getting rid of what we no longer need, we basically, in a way, free up the system to be more useful for the long-term value of the organisation. As an EU organisation, of course, we have a variety of different regulations, laws, etc., that we need to adhere to, and this also very simply helps us adhere to that. So data protection and, of course, public access requests. It helps facilitate them too. Okay. So what it looks like in the system, I don't know how many of you are using open text systems, but maybe just to illustrate, up the top here is simply almost like a cookie trail of our functional folder structure in the system. So this is a cookie crumb basically down folder structure. And then that folder is actually mapped to a what's called an RSI, so an action. So this one is 5 years, delete, and it's time-based. So simply means that this is a time-based trigger, and after 5 years, it will be deleted. Okay, maybe I'll explain that in a little bit more detail. So we have two different types of retention triggers in the system. We have one which are time-based and one which are event-based. So time-based are actions that basically don't necessarily have a very clear or fixed start and end time. So they are kind of ongoing activities. And event-based are, on the contrary, things that do have a very clear defined start and end time. Well, maybe not end time, but end point, so to speak. So these are things like perhaps recruitments, procurements, perhaps legal signings, etc. And what we do is once a document is declared or finalized or frozen in the system, for time-based retention, the retention period starts to tick. And once that period has expired, then it will, in a way, be removed from the system. On the event base, the folder needs to be declared, and then the time starts to tick. The time starts to tick from the date that the item was frozen, as I said, or declared as a record, or simply we also recognize, though, as we are implementing this, that simply some people don't declare items as a record, so we also brought in a default that if something hasn't been used in 2 years in the system, it will automatically be declared as a record to prevent, basically, things that weren't a record clogging up the system. What happens then at the end of the time that the retention period is expired, those items in a way our records management specialists on a periodic level run what's called a destruction report. All of the items which are scheduled for destruction are collected in that report. They can be verified then by the different business areas, and once approved then they can be deleted from the system. And we also always keep evidence on a permanent basis of everything that has been removed from the system. And we also have the ability to override this retention functionality by the use of holds. They're only used in a very, very limited things in terms of if there was maybe perhaps a court case or, yeah, probably that's about it. Okay. Yeah. Well, maybe I'll move on to the final one then, which is retention of emails. And actually, James, I think you explained this far better than I did, so I wish I had your slide to bring back on screen. And I'm also slightly concerned because we're actually trying to implement what this organisation had in place. So very simply, at the moment we have a series of Outlook accounts at the ECB, and all of the emails that are sent or received at the ECB are kept indefinitely at the moment. We want to move to a system where we already educate people to move emails that are business records into our document or into the Darwin system. but we noticed that people aren't probably systematically doing that, and so we want to use a bit of carrot and stick approach to say, please move business relevant records into Darwin, and if you don't, they will be deleted after a period of 12 months. Of course, we need to also, this is very much in its infancy, so I'll also bear in mind what you've been talking about this morning and see if we can somehow improve adherence and don't risk losing perhaps vital business information. Okay, so I think that's probably, everything that I wanted to say. So basically, just to wrap it up, maybe just to say that at the ECB, we basically recognise that we need to move to automation. We have a limited number of staff and we have a proliferation of information and of users. We are trying to follow the approach to centralise items in a single point of truth, which is our EDRMS system. And ensuring that we build in good information governance into our EDRMS system will hopefully allow us reduce manual effort and also implement good information management policies, so to speak, in the bank. And basically, I guess there's a recognition that we need to move away from hands-on, maybe traditional appraisal at the end of a life cycle, and rather build in information governance at the start to help automate and in a way make our lives easy, hopefully long term, so that we can focus on a lot of other burning topics like digital preservation, content analytics, etc. So that's all from myself and from Marie-Corinne at this stage, and just to say thank you very much, and of course we're very happy to take any questions you have. Yes, yeah.
Thanks for the presentation. So it's the floor for the questions.
Hello, Stančić. So I was just wondering, when you were switching from the network drives to the new Darwin system, what happened with the network drives? So are they still holding the records, or were they destroyed? Are you using them for some other purposes, or have you applied some, let's say, safe deletion procedure? Yep. So how did you approach this?
Okay. So initially, when we introduced Darwin in 2007, we did ask business areas to migrate their business records. That happened systematically in some cases and in others not. And in fact, some business areas already froze their network drives back in 2007, 2008, and others didn't. So what we did around about 2013 again was we reintroduced this topic and this program where we forced people to move to our EDRMS system by freezing the network drives and ultimately deleting them. But part of that process of the phase 2 that was illustrated in the on the slide was all about getting business areas to identify what business records existed on their network drive, where their retention hadn't already expired, and to migrate them over to the system. And our IT colleagues, part of it was a manual exercise, but IT colleagues also supported them to undertake that process. So yeah. There is, of course, a small risk that some information has, been deleted, but ultimately we decided to accept that risk, that it was a smaller risk than not handling the issue of the network drives long term. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. Very interesting, very useful insights, I think, also for the Dutch government in how to implement things. Question: you glanced over it briefly, but am I to understand that only paper records go to the archive, European archive in the end, and all digital records are retained by the ECB itself?
Yes. So only paper records go to the physical archive. Although it's probably not quite as simple, but to simplify things, yes, all paper records, so signed legal documents, contracts, etc. But of course, our archivists will be ultimately involved in the appraisal of digital media as well.
And how does this work with giving access to, I don't know how to giving access to?
Yeah, we're a relatively new EU institution, so I think you're talking about giving access to the public, are you?
Yeah.
Yes, so we're a relatively new EU institution, and actually legislation at the moment says that we don't have to open up our archives for 30 years, so we're still a little bit away from that. That being said, we're already looking at the issue, and we might reduce, the period, but also looking together as well with our governance team who look after public access requests to seeing what tools and solutions we could potentially use to help publish our archives potentially on the web, but it's a work in progress at the moment, so we don't have a solution yet.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Yes, yeah.
I have a question about network drives.
Yes.
Where do people work? So because in Darwin,
Okay.
I suppose you would put the fine for.
No, we work from the very, very start. We educate people to work from the very start in our EDRMS. So as soon as you start to create... Sorry, I didn't hear the last bit of your question.
So you would keep all the versions?
Yes, we do. And so when something is finalised as a record, then those versions are purged, unless, of course, you've perhaps locked them to signify this is an important version, etc. But once you finalise something as a record, then it's purged from the system.
And people are diligently following this. They will not go to personal drives.
Do we have 100% adherence? No. We have a very, very high adherence, though, yes. Yeah. And we educate. Everybody who comes into the ECB has to go through a mandatory induction session and a full day's training on information management in Darwin, and they're educated from the very start to do that. So our naughty information management people tend to be actually members of staff who've been at the ECB for a long time. Our newcomers are generally kind of fairly well educated and adherent.
And maybe to add to that, what's also quite interesting to note that there's really a culture of sending links to the document which are stored in our system. So sending attachment is, sometimes it's happened and then everybody's a bit upset, like, oh, they sent an attachment. It's really quite an embedded culture to use the system. So it's, which is quite, I think, the hard work of all the training, change management, communication, the support of our records managers. Yeah.
Last question from the...
Do you do any content curation for your records? Do you check the metadata, those?
Oh, yeah, sorry, maybe I should have said that. So we did, when we implemented the system at the start, largely leave metadata completion to the user on a manual basis. We've learned that was a mistake simply because, for a variety of different reasons, people just maybe didn't see the value or understand the value of doing that, and with time constraints they just weren't doing it. So what we do now is, based on our folder structure, we actually have embedded metadata on the back of that, and we have at the highest level actually an organizational folder structure, which perhaps isn't ideal, but the next level is all functional. So basically we embed metadata on the back of those folders so that as soon as somebody adds a new item to a folder, they inherit metadata. And of course they can add additional as well if that's relevant.
Thank you for the questions and thank you for the speakers for the interesting presentation.
Thank you.